So what is the worst aspect of each From Software Souls game? For Demon Souls, I'm gonna say the areas, but a bonus would be the boss runbacks. Demon Souls areas are incredibly long, but they don't have any checkpoints between them, and there's a boss at the end of them. I will say the boss usually is pretty easy. Demon Souls has a very easy boss cast, but still you're bound to make mistakes. So going through a very long run back and then dying to a boss and having to repeat that and going on a run for 10 minutes can be very annoying. So I would say that's definitely my least favorite part about Demon Souls. For Dark Souls 1, I'm actually going to say the inconsistent level design. Now, the first half of Dark Souls 1 is an absolute masterpiece, but the second half does have a lot of areas that I consider to be lazy and boring, like the Crystal Cave that just feels like an endless run just to get to see it every single time. Or the Tomb of the Giants, which can be incredibly grueling to get through, and I'm pretty sure this is my least favorite area in all of Souls. So even though I love Dark Souls 1, my least favorite aspect of it is definitely the inconsistent level design. Now there's a lot to pick with Dark Souls 2. You have the most infamous boss run ever in Dark Souls 2 with the Frigid Outskirts. Or you could pick the boss cast. You all know Dark Souls 2 has a pretty lackluster and inconsistent boss cast. But what I'm gonna pick is the effigy system of Dark Souls 2. Now, I absolutely adore Dark Souls 2, but the effigy system always seemed odd to me. In Souls games, they're kind of built around you dying and learning the boss's moves and areas. And with the effigy system, I felt like you were getting punished for dying with losing a little bit of health. So I always found that a bit annoying. For Bloodborne, I'm gonna pick the inconsistent boss cast. Now, Bloodborne has some bangers like Lady Maria, Gurman the First Hunter, and my absolute favorite, the Orphan of Kos. But for every great boss, Bloodborne has 2 to 3 bad bosses, and that especially stings with Bloodborne because I know they had the potential to make a ton more great bosses, so that's my least favorite part of Bloodborne. Now, Dark Souls 3 has a few issues you could go with, but I'm personally go with the enemy placement more specifically. Now, I know some people complain about Dark Souls 3 areas being way too linear for Souls, and I don't think the linearity itself is the problem. I think it's the linear level design with the amount of enemies between areas. I just usually found myself running from boss to boss as opposed to the other Souls games where I found myself exploring. So I think the linearity and enemy placement together make a really bad combination, but I would focus more on the enemy placement. Now for Sekiro, I want to say the amount of bosses, not the quality of the bosses, but the amount of bosses. Now it's no secret that Sekiro has excellent combat, and the combat shines the most while fighting a boss like Ishin or Genichiro, and I wish we got more bosses like that. And it's possible to beat Sekiro while only fighting 6 bosses, and with the number being that small, walking into a room and seeing a reused boss is really disappointing. So I know a lot of people would pick reused bosses for Elden Ring, but I was honestly never too bothered by that. Knowing the scale of Elden Ring, I always expected a lot of reused bosses. What I'm gonna pick is the dungeon design. To be specific, I don't mean the legacy dungeon design, just like the average dungeon design. Now, my first playthrough of Elden Ring, absolutely loved the exploration, and some part of that came from the dungeons. But on replays, I find the dungeons to be really boring, especially because they all have a similar structure to them. They're all incredibly short, and they all probably have a boss that's reused somewhere else inside them. Now, it's not the reused boss that's the problem, like I said, but I think it's the combination of everything. Even at the end of my first playthrough, I lost interest in exploring dungeons. I just wanted to do like main content and legacy dungeons. So I would say that's definitely my biggest problem with Elden Ring.